Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. But America's agriculture landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertising campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food to the store where you buy the final product and everything in between. This is Real Ag. The pandemic has changed the way many people live, work, and do basic everyday activities. For many of us in rural America, the effects of the pandemic seem to have been delayed on our way of life. The pandemic fallout did eventually hit rural America, though, and the effects are still greatly felt for many farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural producers. We will discuss the effect of the pandemic on Kansas producers on this episode of Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
The COVID-19 pandemic started for the United States on January 20th, 2020. On March 26, 2020, the CDC recommended the closure of schools, businesses, and all non-essential activities. Depending on whether you live in urban or rural areas, the continued opening and closing of businesses and schools are still real effects for many during the extent of this pandemic. So, how did the pandemic affect some of the farmers here in Kansas?
Well, when the pandemic hit, at first we didn't think it was really going to bother us too much, and then the schools closed. And that was huge. You know, they were all out on spring break, and we got a phone call, we're closing. We're not going back into school. So here we are sitting with a greenhouse full of lettuce and no place to go with it.
When we have lettuce to be harvested, it's got to go out because we got lettuce that's ready to be transplanted in. So we had to keep moving. So we started dumping lettuce.
We had to do something with it. It was ready to harvest. We ended up throwing away quite a bit, but I posted a picture on Facebook, and within 2 hours, I had so many people contact me from food banks and just different areas. You know, we'll take it, don't throw it away. Well, I'd much rather donate it to somebody than throw it away. So we donated to virtually every food bank in the area. Anybody that called and said that they had a refrigerator big enough to store lettuce, we donated. Then Jordan White from White's Food Liner contacted us. If you can put together enough lettuce for a month and make it down to Medicine Lodge and St. John and Kingman, he says, we'll take it. That's what we did. We boxed up a bunch of lettuce and headed south.
And it went over like gangbusters. So now we've picked up grocery store as far as Medicine Lodge, St. John's, Kingman. We were already doing their grocery stores up here by us, but we hadn't gone that far from home until then. So like I said, it closed some doors and then it opened some doors. And we just kept right on going. Then when the pandemic got to where they were keep pulling workers out of the fields in California, no one could get lettuce. So again, we were the only lettuce here in Northwest Kansas for a while, and we were running out. Yeah, for a brief moment, it really affected us. And then on the other hand, it opened things up to where we can keep up again.
When the pandemic first happened, we saw very large negative impacts of the corn market. A lot of our corn is devoted to ethanol use, so when consumers quit driving due to stay-at-home orders and things closed down, we had kind of that double whammy, if you will. Fortunately, as people have went back to work, we're starting to see some traveling. We've recovered through most of that lost demand. And I would just say in general, it impacted corn producers just like everyone else. There was some extra precautions that were taken.
The pandemic has certainly spurred on our lives in different ways and hindered them in others, changed the ways in which we interact with the public through various online means, Zoom and different technology has certainly been a handy tool for innovation in sharing knowledge and connecting with the public. And so I assume that's going to continue. That's been actually an efficient and a neat way to be able to connect.
It certainly hit us at the very beginning. Like I said, we've had a really great relationship with 715 Restaurant in Lawrence, and they would buy greens from us pretty much on a daily basis. All of a sudden, they shut from March till September. You've got to be nimble. You can lose some of that nimbleness of now I just go find somebody else to hopefully get this filled until I can get back to what we were doing before. Small farmers, small producers, you have to react quickly and you have to go solve the problem. So unfortunately, that was one of the great things about our farmers market customer base. We just use social media tools, Facebook and Instagram type things. Just started taking orders from people over the internet and delivering door to door. That wasn't something that I would have been able to continue doing that much longer, I don't think, because of the labor constraints. But me and Ariel would have to pack 60, 70 orders or something and then deliver them the next day and then come back and do it again. But we made it work. Fortunately, the farmers market worked really hard. The staff and everyone there worked really hard to make it happen, to keep it going. It was still there, and it was enough to keep us going.
We do an every other year kind of farm, family, or leadership group to Washington, D.C. And March of 2020, we had roughly 100 members of Kansas Farm Bureau out in Washington, D.C. And for some of you, you may remember on Friday the 13th where you were. I certainly do, when the governor canceled school for the rest of the academic year. But it was a very interesting time to be in D.C. because we'd heard the news and watched it and read it in the clips. But to be in Washington, D.C. of all places, really when the government was starting to shut things down at either the federal or even more localized and state levels. So we came back all safe and healthy. But it was very interesting to be there because that was really when things more or less started melting down and who was deemed essential versus not essential. Agriculture was deemed essential. That really allowed most of agriculture to continue on, quote unquote, as business as usual. It was far from business as usual because very quickly some of the disruptions in the supply chain were out and about. So we did hear from some of our members who were concerned. They were in one county and the county government was kind of issuing a decree or saying, hey, you can only do this on certain days, or we don't want these kind of businesses to be open, versus another county, maybe 2 or 3 counties away, where your parts distributor or your mechanic might have been. Just to relay that through the fabric of here in Kansas, we were very quickly on the phone and exchanging email with Governor Kelly, obviously Kansas Department of Ag Secretary Mike Beam, Dr. Lee Norman over at KDHE. So we really here in the advocacy division of Kansas Farm Bureau, we were busier than ever. Now we weren't working here out of the physical location of headquarters, we were working from home, but we were on all sorts of Zoom calls and virtual conferences and conference calls, and then just an abundant amount of email very quickly, not only taking information that was provided from our grassroots members to say, hey, we've got this issue, how can you help us? But also relaying communication and correspondence from Governor Kelly, the entire Kansas delegation, and other folks back in Washington, D.C. and in the executive branch there, whether it was USDA or Department of Commerce, etc. They were pushing out a lot of information to farmers and ranchers. There have been a number of executive orders that were issued both at the federal and the state level throughout that pandemic. Think of overweight trucks, overwidth trucks to move hay, etc. The governor really stepped up on that and helped farmers and ranchers early on in the pandemic. Some of those executive orders have now gone by the wayside or basically been retired, where others are still in place. Obviously, with some of the direction of the CDC, and it seems like they're flip-flopping a lot on what's happening and what we can do and can't do, but trying to use as much of that federal and state government information to pass that, funnel that down to local decision makers at the county, municipal, and even the school board district level all throughout Kansas.
It does hit you, though, to the fragility of our just-in-time food setup right now. It really drove home the importance of having local food systems so that kind of thing affects our community. There's a lot of us growers that can at least offset some of what might not be available. I think it maybe opened a lot of people's eyes to that being not that far from a possibility. And maybe we shouldn't be so complacent about it's going to be there at the store when we want it, and it's going to come from wherever they have to go to get it. And that we really should focus a lot more energy on producing strong local food systems.
The pandemic has affected Kansans on many different levels. One of those effects has been on a social level. What are some of the social changes that have affected producers in Kansas?
The pandemic has certainly changed the way we work, and one of the ways it's changed that has been in the way we provide information.
Early on, last spring, I think back to the spring of 2020, as we were trying to figure out how to interact with grower customers under these new social distancing guidelines, or at least they were new to us then, I just reminded these guys, a pickup bed happens to be about 6 feet wide. So have your meeting across the bed of a pickup. Just create those opportunities for your protection, for your customers' protection by having some separation and keeping each other safe.
Early on in Sunrise, we established off-site locations, and we used technology. We used all the different types of Zooms and Microsoft Meet type of software to allow our employees to work from home or from a remote office. Being forced in that pandemic conversations, we, like I said, by luck of the draw, we're already kind of there. The pandemic, from an employee standpoint and for basically the way that we handled producers, really didn't disrupt us. In fact, I would say we just forced maybe the producer, the client, a little bit of to adapt with us a little bit quicker.
We attend a lot of meetings. We have committee meetings, we have County Farm Bureau meetings, and many of those now have Zoom options. Even our conferences have Zoom options. If there's content that you weren't able to see, before, you just missed it. Or if you were in the field while this training happened, you just missed it. And now many of them are being recorded, and you can go back later and watch at your own leisure, which will get you a lot more people. You will be able to reach a lot more people with that content when it's virtual.
A lot of the stuff, like last winter, we would have presentations and kind of those informational meetings were canceled. A few boards I'm on, we've had to cancel board meetings and reschedule or do it on Zoom.
I know that we have 105 county farm bureaus here in Kansas, and that many of our counties are going to web-based videos and such for training, for reporting. So that's our effort to help keep people safe. You can affect so many more people when you make it a virtual content, that they can look at it on their own. Say they're not able to attend a safety training, or I know that the American Farm Bureau actually tested a program called the Farm and Ag Safety Training, or FAST program. Kansas was one of 2 pilot states in the nation for that. And what that program involves is 10 modules that are, one half of them can be either done in person or done in a classroom setting or online. So I think that's one of the awesome things that have happened with COVID, is that we're doing so much training online.
We've seen some benefits, some changes in our workflow in the laboratories. For years, we've said, yeah, we'll get to that. Well, it seemed like that process, that timeline never came to bear. And so I think we will see these in some form or fashion remain in place, because, the same manner by which you transmit coronavirus, you can spread influenza, you can spread other common cold, things of that nature. So it's good hygiene, it's good practices, I think, for all of us to be reminded that these are the right things for us to do going forward.
Help availability has gotten harder, and that's something we faced before the pandemic is a shortage of help. I think some of the guys that are using some of the H2A workers and the South Africans had some issues getting help here to begin with. Sounds like the federal government helped alleviate a lot of that, and that worked itself out.
There's just some unique collaborations and innovation going on as a result of the pandemic, and certainly I expect those to continue, and it's been fun to be a part of those.
And it's also, all of us have people that have been directly impacted, our family members have been directly impacted, and our friends, so we all have those contacts, and so we want to take it serious. I think with the pandemic, I think it's changing, and I think it's going to continue to change, and I think as more and more comfort and confidence comes out of it, we'll continue to hopefully go back to more of a normal life. And I think the normal life will be the new life, right? So it won't be what it was pre-pandemic, but it'll be good for us.
We have created kind of some new practices that have helped us create separation among employees, especially in those really busy times of the year, so that we don't have, we can be kind of elbow to elbow in these facilities when we're busy in the middle of soil testing season or feed testing season. So creating some separation, changing some work schedules, changing break schedules, all of those have had the kind of created the opportunity for more separation among employees while they're here on the job. The other half of our employees are all remote located. They're separated, if you will, just by the nature of their job. Our agronomists typically are working in the field alone. During the summertime, we bring on about 25 interns, and so we've made sure that there have been separation there. The interns are traveling in their own pickup, so they're not sharing a pickup cab all day long. They have their own four-wheeler so that you have separation there. Our sales staff are remotely located as well. Currently, they obviously are going to comply with the rules that a facility has in place that they're calling on.
This is going to be the new way of doing business through technology, through remote conference calls, and I think people are adapting quite well to it. Do I like the old traditional way of doing business and shaking a farmer's hand or doing it face to face? Absolutely. And we're going to continue to do that. But I do think that with change, there's going to be challenges. But I think with those challenges, it also brings some exciting ways of doing business.
One of the main concerns that have affected Kansas producers is the need for supplies and the lack of their availability. What are some of the supply chain issues that have affected Kansas producers?
I think farmers where we work solitary or pretty small groups within farm operations, the pandemic at first we would have said wasn't affecting us too much. Then in some early on, maybe some demand issues in the grains, meat sectors. But now I would say there's a lot of effect on ag operations, primarily in parts availability and supply chain issues. We've seen supply chain issues that have affected us severely, whether it's a crop protection product, parts availability, you name it. It's either tough to find, and if you can find it, the prices went up quite a bit.
And we're just really now starting to see it. Parts availability, chemicals availability. Had a good friend's grain cart breakdown a couple days ago. The part they need to fix it is 3 months out. They ended up having to buy another grain cart because they need it now. And I think we're just starting to see a lot of that stuff, and I don't think it's going to get better for quite some time, to be honest with you.
Well, the only way you can really adapt to a supply chain shortage is try to be thinking ahead of what could break and what could go wrong. Be early ordering on your crop product. Make sure you put those orders in with your chemical salesman or seed reps, and be planning ahead, because as the supply chain issues, we're really used to just-in-time delivery, and I think that's society as a whole, whether it's Amazon or not, farmers got accustomed to that too, and being able to call a dealership up or a co-op up and say, I need this, and they had it, and that's not the way it is now. And so I think everyone just has to be better planners in their management, and the reality is if we can keep that up, that should make us better operations in the future.
We've seen stronger demand from export markets that's taken the corn out. These weren't a one-to-one replacement of ethanol, but two fascinating markets to grow that I saw grow through the pandemic. First and foremost is the demand for hand sanitizer just grew exponentially, virtually overnight. So there's ethanol plants that through just some additional filtration and other methods were able to pivot their market and supply air ethanol for hand sanitizer. And I thought that was just neat. For number one, just kind of shows the ingenuity of the industry. But overall, it was great showing that, hey, we produce a product, corn that goes into ethanol that is useful for people to be able to put on your hands to protect against pandemic. So that was the neat part there. And then also, as we've seen with trends, we saw, alcohol. It's no secret alcohol consumption increased during the pandemic. There was also plants that were able to produce, it's called GNS, grain natural spirits, that have supplied into the alcohol market. A lot of, there's a good deal of this. We've seen there's all these new seltzers, these hard seltzers out there. A lot of that is produced with alcohol that comes out of certain ethanol plants with additional filtration and inspection.
We've learned how to become even more efficient and more resilient all throughout the supply chain. I think without question, when we start talking about some of our cattle supply and certainly where the packing plants are, making sure that the employees are able to show up and work, and how they work through social distancing there in a slaughter facility. Similar to some of the challenges that we've heard even more recently is the whole supply chain disruption. So if you wanted seed, or even more importantly, if you wanted chemical, a lot of times that is procured from somewhere internationally, Asia, Europe, etc. It needs to come over on on the cargo ship here to the United States, well, the Port of Long Beach, the Port of LA, many other ports in the Gulf or even the East Coast, the logistics nightmare and just the backup of product has really slowed down our members' ability to find the products that they need. So we're trying to work through that. I think some of the other things when it comes to how producers make money, they've had to diversify a little bit more, because if you were backed up with your swine finishing and farrowing facility, or if you were in the beef cattle industry, you normally had kind of a normal buyer or somebody that would slaughter your critters for you. Well, all of a sudden they were closed, or they had other issues going on. So we've had a lot of kind of direct-to-consumer marketing happening now, and Shop Kansas Farms is a great program that's really kind of tied up the producers with a potential purchaser on whatever product that may be. I mean, it's organic, it's fresh fruits and vegetables, it's certainly the livestock industry. So some of those changes I think are here to stay. What I led with there earlier on just the supply chain disruption, on being able to procure your parts and your seed and your chemicals, we certainly hope that gets evened out sooner rather than later, because it is making it very difficult for producers, not only this growing season, but when they start planning for 2022, what crops, what rotation, are they going to be able to get the maybe the pesticide or the herbicide that they need to take care of their field. And if they're not able to get that, then they're going to have to go back to some type of tillage. So a lot of decisions are already being made today.
Going forward into 2022, I think the biggest thing facing most producers is going to be, one, the cost of the inputs, but secondly, getting them. We're hearing lots of stories that Roundup is going to be extremely short, along with lots of chemicals, parts, availability, tires. I mean, I just, not only are we going to have to pay through the nose for the stuff, we're going to have a hard time getting it. And I think that's probably the biggest issue that's going to face us in 2022.
So some of the adjustments we've had to make in terms of supplies we've kept on hand, it's expensive to keep inventory, and that's why dealerships don't have much inventory, which was how they made just-in-time delivery work, and it was trying to manage that financial system. But I think farmers have found we need just-in-time, and when we say that, we need it when we're broke down. We can't wait 3 days for a part. And so I think every farm's going to have to look at their operations and say, if this breaks, what are the odds of someone having it, and how long will it shut me down? And I can give a perfect example of yesterday. I had a shank on a fertilizer applicator break that no one really carries because they don't break that often. Well, a couple years ago I had one break and I couldn't find one, so I ordered 2. I was able to get back and going within an hour instead of 3 days. And so I think those types of changes for operations that haven't been doing that already, everyone has to learn to adapt, and I think that should help us in the future.
Other issues that have affected Kansas producers are on the distribution side. Getting your products to the buyers is an important aspect of any business, and it's no different with producers of Kansas. So, what are some of the issues in the distribution process that Kansas producers have had to deal with?
At first, because we are in a very rural part of Kansas, I felt like it was a little delayed hitting us. However, we do deliver to Kansas City, so we had to be very aware of those regulations. And there was a moment where we didn't know if we were going to be able to continue to deliver, which is a pretty big problem when you have 2,000 pounds of tomatoes just sitting there. You can't, it's not like you can put that product in a package and save it, You've got to get that product on the shelf. So there was a time where it was kind of like, well, what are we going to do with these tomatoes if we can't deliver to Kansas City? It just made us be more aware and more cautious.
Especially early on in the pandemic, the issue of food access was highlighted very much. So some grocery stores were running out of food. We still see some issues with supply chains currently across the country and in Kansas. And so that made people very aware of where their food came from. And so what that brought to the forefront was this interest in gardening. So people were interested in growing their own food, but also they were very interested in shopping locally, seeing what local farms were producing, and supporting that. So we've seen a great growth in that interest, and that interest has continued. And I think that going forward, that's really strengthened our local food system and continued to raise the awareness of people in our community of where they get their food.
We have new customers that we had to go out and get. And then for like a bad thing, basically schools. We had a lot of schools that they shut down and we were no longer able to take any to them, so we had an excess amount of product. But like Mom stated on, we had people come in that we donated to. So we had a lot of product get put out there that probably wouldn't have originally because we just had excess. So we were able to say, here's our product, take it. We need you to do something with it because we couldn't.
We hope to be able to produce enough lettuce to still go down to Medicine Lodge and those areas and supply the schools that we have. That was one of the reasons we wanted to add on, is because we weren't able to grow enough. If we get all the schools back on and we are still delivering down south, we're going to need to put another bay on, probably 2 more bays.
Despite all the problems the pandemic has created, many Kansas producers have seen some positives. So, what solutions have Kansas producers seen that arose from the pandemic? And what are their hopes for the future beyond it?
Made us think more outside the box. You know, you kind of get in a rut. After a while, you just keep doing the same thing over and over, keep going to the same customers over and over. When the pandemic hit, that forced us to go look for new customers, go look for more directions to go with our lettuce.
In the field, I think where we probably will see the biggest change is utilizing more IoT type sensors in the field to reduce the number of visits to the field and to reduce the number of interactions between our agronomists and growers, not to zero. There's still an important human element there that exists. But if we can limit the number of times that they interact, if we can really limit it to those times when there's critical information for them to share, I think those are steps forward that are good for us to invest in as a business for our future.
I think it's also shown just how exactly resilient modern day agriculture is, how efficient we are. Outside of some pandemic buying, when we talk about toilet paper, or there was even kind of a rush on the refrigerator shelves in the grocer, if you will, they were, we only have a day's worth of pork, we only have a day's worth of beef. In all honesty, very few of those rations or shortages nationwide, but certainly here in Kansas existed, and a lot of the shortages did pop up because it was kind of irrational purchasing behavior. So I think Americans hopefully realize that the gallon of milk just doesn't come from the grocery store shelf, and the loaf of bread doesn't just come from the grocery store, but what goes into that? Where is the mill, and where's the baker, and obviously even further down the supply chain, who's actually growing and raising the food, fuel, fiber that we do produce here in America and Kansas so abundantly and so affordably and nutritiously all at the same time.
The pandemic has changed the way we work, socialize, and live our lives, and it's been no different for the farmers and producers of Kansas. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Real Ag on the pandemic effect. As always, you can check out this and other episodes of Real Ag on SmokyHillsPBS.org. From the producers at Smoky Hills PBS, this has been Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.